We are on Canto 3, Chapter 17, Text 18. Prajapatir namatayor akarshid. Prajapatir namatayor akarshid. Yad prak swadehad yamayor ajayata. Yaprak swadehad yamayor ajayata. Tamvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Tamvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tang hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Yang tang hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Prajapatir namatayor akarshid. Yad praksvade hadi yamayor ajayata. Tamvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tam hiranyaksham asuta sagrata. Prajapatir namatayor akarshid. Yapraksvade had yamayor ajayata. Tangvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tam hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Prajapatir nama tayor akarshid. Yapraksvade yamayor ajayata. Tangvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tam hiranyakshama sutta sagrataha. Prajapatir nama tayor akarshid. Yapraksade had yamayor ajayata. Tangvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tang hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Prajapatir nama tayor akarshid. Yapraksvade had yamayor ajayata. Tangvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tang hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Ladies, anyone? Prajapatir nam tayor akarshid. Yapraksade had yamayor ajayata. Tamvai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Yang tam hiranyaksham asuta sagrata. Ladies, anyone? Just hold. I want to just, if there are any Vaishnavis that want to do it, then fine. Otherwise, we're going to cap it off because. Tir nama tayor akarshid. Ya praksvadeha yamayor ajayata. Tang vai hiranya kashipum vidu praja. Tam tam hiranyaksham asuta sagrata. So I'm going to skip to the translation because we're getting late on time. Kasyapa Prajapati, the creator of the living entities, gave his twin sons their names. And the one who was born first, he named Hiranyaksha. And the one who was first conceived by Diti, he named Hiranyakashipu. All right, so I say, and you please repeat. Kasyapa Prajapati, the creator of the living entities, gave his twin sons their names. The first one who was born first, the one who was born first, he named Hiranyaksha. And the one who was first conceived by Diti, he named Hiranyakashipu. Okay, so here is the purport by Srila Prabhupada. There is an authoritative Vedic literature called the Pinda Siddhi, in which the scientific understanding of pregnancy is very nicely described. It is stated that when the male secretion enters the menstrual flux in the uterus in 2 successive drops, the mother develops 2 embryos in her womb, and she brings forth twins in reverse order to that in which they were first conceived. The child conceived first is born later, and the one conceived later is brought forth first. The first child conceived in the womb lives behind the second child. So when the birth takes place, the second child appears first, and the first child appears second. In this case, it is understood that Hiranyaksha, the second child conceived, was delivered first, whereas Hiranyakashipu, the child who was behind him, having been conceived first, was born second. Prajapatir nama tayor akarshid yapraksvade hadiyamayor ajayata tang vai hiranya kashipung vidu praja yang tang hiranyaksham asuta sagrataha. Kasyapa Prajapati, the creator of the living entities, gave his twin sons their names. The one who was born first, he named Hiranyaksha, and the one who was first conceived by Diti, he named Hiranyakashipu. This particular verse talks a little bit about the Garbhādhāna-Saṁskāra, which, of course, devotees have been discussing over the last few days here in this section of Srimad Bhagavatam. And, of course, that's the idea where prior to conception there is a purifying ceremony that's done. In ISKCON, it was that one should chant 50 rounds or something like that. And because then the consciousness would be purified, the child being called to the womb would also be of a higher class of being. Because we know yam yam vapi smaran bhavam, whatever a person thinks about at the time of death, that's the destination they will get in the next life. So depending on our thinking at the time of death is where the soul, once broken free from this current body, which is now departing, we go to a new body. So similarly, at the time of conception, the mentality of the two parents calls a particular kind of child to the womb. So if the parents are purified and thinking about trying to bring a child into the world, and that child would be a devotee and serve Krishna, then a highly well-mannered and devotionally inclined entity will enter into the womb. Otherwise, likely you will get a very materialistically oriented living being who will have, problems like everybody else. And that is, unfortunately, why we talk so much in the Vedic literatures, talk so much about Varna-Saṁskāra. Varna-Saṁskāra means that unwanted children that are, as we see, probably the easiest way to describe it is sex happens. People don't decide to have sex. They're in a situation and suddenly their emotions and, the whole situation just goes too far, and the next thing you know that they're having sex. They didn't plan for it. They didn't think about it. They certainly weren't planning to conceive a child. They just wound up because of either romantic impulses or just erotic impulses or whatever it happens to be. Suddenly there was sex. And now what will happen next? In our modern society, usually the next concept is, we have to abort the child because we didn't plan to have this child, and this child's inconvenient for us, and we are not married and we don't want to be married or whatever it is, then we better abort this child. And so this is very kind of straightforward, common decision that's done by many, many people these days. But of course neglects the idea that the child is a being and he's alive and he's a person, although very small. And now that child is forced to abandon the womb that they started to inhabit, and they're pushed on to another incarnation. And because of this disturbance, there's sin incurred when this kind of abortion takes place. Of course, right now, in the United States, abortion is a big thing. The Supreme Court ruled against allowing abortion, and in some states, they are resisting the trend, but we'll see what happens in the long run. The problem is whether or not abortion is legal. What certainly is common is a very sexually saturated society where there's so much thinking about sex, talking about sex, so much dressing and gesturing and engaging in things that are not sex directly, but are oriented toward creating the possibility of sex. That how can you, in a culture like that, stop people from getting pregnant? The motor is out of control. So naturally, in such a circumstance, you will have Varna-Saṁskāra, children that weren't wanted, children that were an accident of the parents deciding to go to a movie or do something, or some people met at just a random place in some random situation, and sex resulted, and now somebody's pregnant, and now a child is on the way, but that child was never planned for, and now the child is like a burden or an unwanted byproduct, and the child grows up feeling that. And certainly because no Garbhādhāna-Saṁskāras were initiated, then that child also has his own problems or her own problems. And this is the way our society is. And as our society becomes more and more saturated with this type of sexuality, this type of sex intercourse, this type of conception, then people will become more and more, in general, unmanageable, and they will become very disturbed, constantly disturbed, and disturbing. They will be not only disturbed themselves, but they will disturb others. So I thought that one thing that somehow hasn't come up, maybe it has come up, I haven't seen all the classes that have been going on this particular thread of Srimad Bhagavatam. But in chapter 16 of Bhagavad Gita, we have divine and demoniac natures. And it's really interesting to stop and think about what is the difference between someone in a divine nature and somebody in a demoniac nature. What makes one like a demon and one another person like a devotee? What are the qualities, and why do those qualities work that way? And what is the ultimate net result of acting in one way or being in one way? I tend to think of Krishna consciousness in general as the search for the perfect attitude, because in all situations we are looking for the right attitude for that situation. And I've seen it. It's kind of like, I don't know, those of you who don't wear glasses don't know what this is like, but sometimes when you go get tested for glasses, they put these different lenses on, different ones, and there's one where it looks blurry, and another one looks a little less blurry, and then there's one that seems about right, and then there's one where your eyes kind of go, woo, and so this idea of looking for a perfect attitude is when you get that perfect attitude, suddenly everything just clicks, whatever is going on. And the perfect attitude is not exactly the same in all situations. But when suddenly you feel in your heart and your mind that you have the right attitude, then everything seems right. Everything seems okay despite, difficulties or whatever it is. And to me, it seems like if you're advancing in Krishna consciousness, you learn how to sort of live in that feeling all the time, that feeling that, whatever it is, it's within Krishna's charge, and you will try to do your best to play your part in it. And but this can only be done if you have the right emotional bearing, if you have the right purification, if you're situated in the mode of goodness. So here, Krishna in chapter 16 is describing, first he describes those who are divine in their qualities. So the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, fearlessness, purification of one's existence, cultivation of spiritual knowledge, charity, self-control, performance of sacrifice, study of the Vedas, austerity, simplicity, nonviolence, truthfulness, freedom from anger, renunciation, tranquility, aversion to fault-finding, compassion for all living entities, freedom from covetousness, gentleness, modesty, steady determination, vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, cleanliness, freedom from envy, and the passion for honor. These transcendental qualities, O son of Bharata, belong to godly men endowed with divine nature. So most of us recognize these qualities as virtues. And when a person has these, we feel comfortable around them and we feel attracted by them. And there's a feeling of peacefulness, a feeling of camaraderie. A lot of things can develop when these kind of qualities are invested in an individual. Now, then Krishna begins to talk about the opposite. 16th chapter is about the guys with the white hats and the guys with the black hats. So here we have, now we're talking about the people with the black hats. Pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. These qualities belong to those of demoniac nature, O son of Pritha. Pride, arrogance, conceit, anger, harshness, and ignorance. And right now, you can tell that in our everyday society, when you walk around in the outside world, most people tend toward these qualities and not so much towards the others. And this is because there is no real culture of spiritual cultivation in our modern mainstream culture. So as a result, it's natural that people will be arrogant. They will be very narcissistic. They will think that they're the center of the universe. They'll get angry very easily. Don't we see that everywhere? That it's very common to walk by as somebody's, wailing into somebody else with some kind of, a harangue of some kind or another. Or sometimes people just come to blows. That's also a quite common occurrence. And this is because the demoniac nature is not harmonious. Everybody thinks themselves to be a little god in themselves, and so therefore they assume that everybody else is there to serve them in some ways. And when they're not served properly, they get angry at their servants. Of course, the other people do not see themselves as the servant of that person, but this is where we find that arrogance and anger are very common in our world, because everybody wants to control. And of course, the way that nature makes things because of karma, some people are in a position to control due to birth, being in a wealthy or powerful family, due to having wealth itself, some way maybe not being in a family that was, came into wealth, but the individual somehow amassed wealth of doing some kind of projects, and now that person is able to control others. So people who have that control tend to be very egotistic and self-centered. And often they tend to deal with others as if those others were their servants. And if in fact they are the boss or the manager, then in one sense those persons are their servants. This also is there in the military, where you have actually a defined chain of command, and those at the top of the chain have to be obeyed without question. So this is the nature of people of egotistic or demoniac qualities relish the sense of being superior to others, of having control over others. So of course then, the next verse, Krishna tells Arjuna, the transcendental qualities are conducive to liberation, whereas demoniac qualities make for bondage. Do not worry, O son of Pandu, for you are born with divine qualities. So he's telling Arjuna that don't think that your tendency to want to fight this battle is a demoniac tendency. So he says, O son of Pritha, in this world there are two kinds of created beings. One is called divine and the other demoniac. I have already explained to you at length the divine qualities. Now hear from me the demoniac. Those who are demoniac do not know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Neither cleanliness or proper behavior nor truth is found in them. They say this world is unreal. There is no foundation, no God in control. They say it is produced from sex desire and has no cause other than lust. Following such conclusions, the demoniac who are lost to themselves and who have no intelligence engage in unbeneficial, horrible works meant to destroy the world. Now, again, we don't have to stretch our imagination very far with these descriptions. We see this everywhere. And if we look at the nature of the world, not just what we see around us here in the local neighborhood, but and what's going on in the world at large, we see exactly this, that you have people who are in charge and they expect to be obeyed. And these people who are apparently running the world, the politicians and the business magnates, those people who have some enormous amount of wealth, either because they run a business or they're in banking or something like that. Such people are able to cause things in the world to happen in a certain way. Now, what is it that politicians and business managers, what is it that they base their actions and their understanding on? And that is various kinds of mundane material philosophy. So this philosophy exists in the world around us. It's not new. And generally, people in the business world, people in politics, have a very self-centered approach to what they want, how they're going to get it, and what role others play. So unbeneficial, horrible works, we don't have to look far to see those. Everywhere we see pollution, strife, war, disease. We see famine. We see at the same time, we see the opposite, people having way too much to eat so that people can't control their appetites. And of course, this is scientifically been designed to be this way, that people who are in charge of our world have discovered that by making food in a certain way, people will not be able to resist eating more than they should, and that food will not be nutritious or healthy, but rather it will be kind of bad for you, but at the same time tasty and addictive. So as a result, people will not be able to manage their health, and in general, people will be not very healthy, not very able, and this is all a part of this unbeneficial, horrible works. Sometimes this is referred to as Maya Sukhaya, and sometimes this is referred to as Ugra Karma, unbeneficial, horrible works. I was giving a class a couple of days ago on Zoom in Winnipeg, Ontario, and they asked to learn about Ugra Karma. So next week, we were talking about Prahlad Maharaj, the qualities of Prahlad Maharaj, and now we're going to be talking about Dhruva Maharaj, and we're going to talk about Ugra Karma and Maya Sukhaya, this collective decision by the leaders of society to create a world where their desires and their philosophy creates all kinds of problems at a very basic level. And therefore we have this huge plastic patch of junk floating out in the Pacific Ocean. We have landfills everywhere filling up with things that are not biodegradable, things that are dangerous that seep into the groundwater. We have everywhere people taking too many medications, and it's now we find that when people take all these medications, when they go to the toilet and they pass urine, these chemicals aren't fully dissolved, and so they get passed out in the urine. This urine then gets recycled, and you're recycling these chemicals too. So there is a very serious residuum of, our cultural, overuse and over-reliance on various kinds of drugs is being put back. It's like the secondhand smoke of the modern age, somehow or other the human society finally sort of pushed smoking into the background. So people who don't want to smoke aren't forced to smoke just because they're in the same room with somebody who does smoke, But this is the same thing that people by, just drinking water are taking some degree of chemicals from what other people peed out into that water at some point. It was cleansed of other stuff, and now it's been recycled. And so the air is bad for you. The kind of chemicals used in clothing, in automobile manufacture, in building materials, you name it, many things are carcinogenic or disturbing to the senses. And then we have the electromagnetic disturbances from 5G and all these other things that are also having their effect on human beings in different ways. And we live in, especially New York, a place where noise pollution is quite common. You know, we have sirens day and night, and now our peaceful Schermerhorn Street has been turned into one-way traffic jam with people honking all the time, you know. So we have all kinds of things going on. These things are all debilitating to the peace, to the consciousness, to the general way that we experience the world around us. And these are unbeneficial, horrible works. How did these things come to be? It was some people decided that more money was to be made in this way, and so as a result, these various projects were undertaken, and now we have a world that's polluted, diluted, disturbed, and so forth. So whenever a person removes God from their philosophy, when you remove God from your philosophy, you have disconnected reality at a very low, basic level. And once you've disconnected reality, then nothing good can come from that. Whatever you do, whatever your attitude is, whatever projects you do, will be projects that will cause disturbance and disharmony. So that's very nature of the way it works. When you're in harmony with the Supreme, you will be in harmony with yourself, you'll be in harmony with those around you, you'll be in harmony with the world itself, the nature, the ecology. Now, when you're out of harmony with the Supreme, then you're out of harmony with yourself, you're damaging your own body, you're out of harmony with others, you're always creating a disturbance in society, and you're out of harmony with the ecology, you're creating a mess that somebody has to clean up, you know. So this is the nature of disconnecting from God. It can't be helped. And when it's done on a large scale, with large-scale philosophical or political projects, like, say, for instance, the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, here was of course, communism is not a political system, it's an economic system. However, because it was a large-scale economic system, it had to have a political way of working in the world. So, as a result, this communistic system, philosophically, it was based on atheism. So there was a statewide commitment to atheism. And as a result of a statewide commitment to atheism, it's like you pull the plug out of the wall, that the fan is spinning slower and slower and slower and slower, and finally it stops. So because of prior years, or for that matter, prior centuries, there was a certain reserve built up of people who had done the right thing and who had stored things and properly managed things. But now you have this communistic, atheistic system coming in, doing everything in a way that they imagined that would make everything heaven on earth. That was the whole idea, that these poor downtrodden workers, you know, they're under the thumb of these giant autocratic, megalomaniacs of industry. Now they can be free in a communist state where everybody has the right to the means of production. However, what actually happened was quite different than that. That instead of creating a heaven on earth, more or less a hell on earth was created. And this was because many communistic plans and ways of working are just impractical. Since there was no market demand, they would make as much of something as somebody thought was the right amount. So they would make too much of some things and not enough of other things. And since whether you work well or you work poorly, you're given pretty much the same position, so nobody has any impetus to work well, And if something is totally impractical, as long as nobody speaks up about it, it just goes on year after year. And so we can see this is how a mind that's disconnected from God works. And this is how a society or a political structure that's disconnected from God works. It's disconnected from God. So therefore, because one is not performing sacrifice, as we hear in Bhagavad Gita, then there can be no reciprocation from either the Supreme or the demigod. So therefore, one cannot expect that there will be fruits and there will be, a nice circumstances to live in. It won't work like that. But not only that, you're also disconnected from reality. So you're making basic, fundamental mistakes in just, how things work and what gets done and what doesn't get done, or who gets praised and who gets fired, So in this way, the logistics of everything even break down. And this is what eventually happened in the whole communistic setup in Russia, and other countries followed suit, but still going on in China. China's also running down, but in a different way. Who knows how long it'll take before that empire collapses. But because something is disconnected from the Supreme, the plug has been pulled. It's just a question of time before things finally run into the ground. So those who have no faith in God, such people are that way because they have lived impiously in the past. So as a result of previous impious action, one tends not to have faith in either scriptures, in holy people, in religion, and therefore such people are behind the eight ball. They will naturally do the wrong thing. They will unite with other people who are also doing the wrong thing. And as a result, they'll create a society of people doing the wrong thing with goals that are unbeneficial, horrible works. So that's kind of the scenario. There's a whole lot more that I had planned to say, but there's no time, and I want to leave some time for questions. So I'll ask if anybody has any questions or comments on what we've just discussed so far.
What's the hope, Maharaj?
What's that?
What's the hope?
Well, the hope is great because this whole Maya Sukhaya or Ugra Karma will collapse on its own to some extent. This has been predicted. And just like we have, the cycle of the yugas, we go through Satya Yuga, Treta, Dwapara, and finally Kali. At the end of Kali, there'll be another Satya Yuga. So on a smaller scale, in a much smaller time frame, similarly, social structures arise and then they collapse. And when something is disconnected from God, it's disconnected from reality. And so it's like a car that has the carburetor on upside down, or like a gearbox with the wrong number of gear teeth in it, you know. It's grinding away, and eventually it's going to, you know, become defunct. Now, we don't know, you know, maybe there'll be some kind of big, you know, shootout at OK Corral. It could go that way. We don't know what Krishna has planned. We hope it doesn't go that way, but it could go that way. But it might just crumble like a old, you know, cake that's been out too long and the pieces are starting to fall off of it, you know. And to some extent it does look like that's happening, that things are crumbling here and there. The talking heads of our modern, media, they are telling us all kinds of things, you know, promising us that we will, you know, be flying to first the moon, we'll establish some bases there, and then we'll go to Mars, and we'll have bodies that are partly robotic so we can live forever, or we can live for a long time, that we will have communication like we can't imagine it, and we'll have all these kind of things, you know. They talk like this, but they don't actually understand what is happening from a karmic point of view, because one of the main features of atheism and of people who are demoniac is the complete rejection of the concept of karma. There's a sense that I can do what I want to do, and if I'm strong enough, ain't nobody going to tell me nothing. You know, I'm not going to be bothered by anybody. That's the philosophy by which, you know, people at the top of the political ladder, people at the top of the economic ladder, that's what they base their lives on. That if I have enough money, if I have enough political clout, nobody's going to say nothing to me, you know. And unfortunately, it's not true that the mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine, you know. So eventually karma catches up to everybody. You can't buck the system forever. You can ride on a wave of your past material good karma, but eventually your bank account goes to zero, and then you hit the fan at that point. You know, that's it. And it happened to Duryodhana, happened to Hiranyakashipu, it happened to Hiranyaksha, and it'll happen to any other modern demon sooner or later. You know, their you know, demoniac focus on their own plans and their rejection of anything to do with the Supreme Being will catch up, and their misuse and abuse of others will eventually catch up to them. That's the way that it works, you know. You can get by for some time, but eventually it all catches up to you. Other questions or comments? Yeah.
Thought, so as devotees, you know, you were explaining how practically everything in this modern world is, you know, destroying us in some way. So as devotees living in this society, and how much do we get involved? How much, you know, because there's the other part of Prabhupada's mission, as we've heard it said, you know, farm communities, establish these communities where you can actually try to live a more natural way of life is one of the principles of ISKCON states. So
Well, I think our main focus should always be that we're para upakarakas, you know, that we are focused mostly on the supreme welfare work, you know. Most likely as a result of, you know, how we have to live and everything, our lives are going to be cut short from what they would have been in some kind of more naturalistic, you know, it's kind of, you know, what can be done, you know. But we are trying to save the whole world. And we do it one person at a time, and by explaining Krishna consciousness, it goes out in the world, it has its effect, and gradually, as different parts of this, ship of fools starts to crumble and decay, people are going to be looking for alternatives, and some will run across Krishna consciousness. And if we give someone spiritual life, we have actually benefited them, in a way that is much better than if we fed them some biscuits, or we gave them a place to sleep, or did some cataract surgery for them, or whatever it was. I mean, these things are not wrong to do, but the point that I'm making here is that what is the real problem of the world? The real problem of the world is not pollution. The real problem of the world is not bad politics. The real problem of the world is not war. The real problem of the world is not crime, or hatred, or racial, or any of these things. The real problem of the world is dirty hearts. So if you can fix that, you've fixed everything with one stroke. And that's why devotees are fixated on this idea of giving the message of Krishna. Sometimes giving the message of Krishna using a platform of like charity or one of these other things is a way to interact with people, just like we could interact with them in some other way. But that is a way to interact with other people, through charity, and people appreciate that, and then they learn what the philosophy is behind it. But our main product is we are trying to correct people's dirty hearts, and that's through the process of Krishna consciousness. So if we do that, we will have the most bang for our buck. We will have the most impact on the world. And this is what Prabhupada taught us, and basically what our whole philosophy teaches, that if a person starts to clean up their own backyard, they start to make the world a better place. And they stop being one of those people that are making the world a worse place. They jump off the demoniac, SUV, and they jump onto the divine car, so they jump off one into the other. All right, so we are at about 4 or 5 after. So I appreciate your attention. All glories to Srimad Bhagavatam. All glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.